2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Welcome everyone and welcome to Yuka.
Live in 1 minute.
I guess that these were the three first.
Okay, live in 30 seconds.
Hello everyone, welcome to our youth-led talk show on climate change and human rights as part of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. This official Belgian side event is being organized by the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UN Youth Delegates from Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Ireland and Sweden. We are delighted to be joined by three partner organizations, namely the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, UNCO, which is the Children and Youth Constituency to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and World Youth for Climate Justice. My name is Anna Paeshuyse. I am Belgium's UN Youth Delegate on Sustainable Development, and I'm co-hosting today's event. I'm here with my colleague Conn. Welcome, Conn.
Thanks, Anna. My name is Conn McCarrick, and I'm Ireland's UN Youth Delegate. I'm so delighted to welcome you all to Brussels today. And we've such a fantastic lineup of speakers today, so we're really looking forward to getting started.
It's great to see so many activists and change makers in the audience. Even though we are all focused on one particular crisis at the moment, namely building back from the COVID-19 pandemic, we cannot ignore that other ongoing crisis, namely the climate crisis.
And the connection between the climate crisis and human rights is clear. Climate change exacerbates pre-existing inequalities and human rights-related challenges such as poverty, well-being, wealth inequality, gender inequality, and many others. And it has an acute impact on vulnerable groups all around the world. Climate mitigation and adaptation measures will have a major impact on the right to life, water, sanitation, food, education, and self-determination. And as such, we, the group of young people here, believe that this topic, climate change and human rights, is crucially important. Over the next few hours, we will discuss the possibilities that international law offers for strengthening climate ambitions, climate justice, and intergenerational equality. We will also present to you the results of the World's Youth for Climate Justice's work on the legal aspects of an advisory opinion from the ICJ. After that, we will have an amazing panel discussion discussing the role of youth leadership for climate justice and the importance of a rights-based approach in the fight for a safe climate. So let's get started.
Yes, indeed. We want to encourage you at home to participate in the discussion as well, as much as possible. To start, be sure to let us know where you are tuning in from in the chat box. We'd encourage you to amplify what you hear today using the hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium. So I'm repeating, hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium. So we can share your insights too. Feel free to leave any comments or questions in the chat box, and we'll incorporate them into our question and answers segment. We look forward to hearing from you. To introduce the event, we're so honored to welcome Zakia Khatabbi, our Belgian Federal Minister for Climate, Environment, Sustainable Development and the European Green Deal. Minister Khatabbi, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is yours. You can start if you like. Thank you.
Hopefully the minister can hear us there now. We're really looking forward to hearing her comments, and it's such an honor to have her here today. So we're really honored, and we're so excited to be here in Belgium. So yeah, thank you so much, Minister.
Excellencies, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, as Belgian Federal Minister of Climate, Environment, Sustainable Development and Green Deal, I'm delighted to welcome you to this exciting youth-led side event on climate change and human rights. The involvement of youth is a priority for Belgium, not only for a participatory perspective, but also because intergenerational solidarity is a fundamental building block of sustainable development and the 2030 agenda. I am therefore proud that each year our youth representatives are part of our national delegation to the high-level political forum on sustainable development and contribute substantially to the various sessions and preparatory meetings of this forum. Over the years, the youth delegates have built quite a reputation for organizing interesting side events on important topics during the high-level political forum. I think we can all agree that today's agenda lives up to that theme. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for the hard work, commitment, and passion. The 2030 agenda and the SDGs offer us a clear path forward for development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. However, we are unfortunately not on track to meet the SDGs. The recovery from the coronavirus pandemic offers us an opportunity to make our society more climate friendly, more sustainable, and thus more resilient. By building back greener and better, we should create, via just transition, a low carbon economy. Together with all relevant actors in the decade of action for the SDGs, we can shape a future that is better for everyone while leaving no one behind. Climate change and human rights are indeed clearly intertwined. The Paris Agreement, a historic milestone in many perspectives, is also the first multilateral environmental agreement that makes a direct link to human rights. In light of the negotiations running up to COP26 in Glasgow, all parties should be mindful of this link with human rights when, for example, considering Article 6. In order to avoid malpractices, as we've sometimes seen in the context of its predecessor, the Clean Development Mechanism, the Article 6 should integrate human rights. Even more importantly, far away from negotiation rooms, there is no doubt that this is a challenge for all parties to make this happen on the ground, where vulnerable communities and individuals are confronted with the impacts of climate change and the consequences of mitigation and adaptation policies. All actors should be mindful of the impact their policies and practices have on human rights, state and non-state actors. There has been an increase in climate reporting regarding public investments and across corporate and financial institutions since the introduction of the Paris Agreement in 2015. But there is a need for more and better climate disclosures, moving away from static compliance-based reporting to due diligence reporting models. Such models include disclosing how climate issues have been integrated in governance, strategy and risk management, and what practical actions have and can be taken to avoid related risks. Furthermore, we know that climate change is a threat multiplier. climate change interacts with other risks and threats, increasing the risk of insecurity, crisis, and even conflict. These interactions can take many forms. Droughts, floods, and failed harvests can lead to volatile food prices, food shortages, and political upheaval. It can be exacerbate poverty, and thus SDG 1, force people into unemployment, SDG 8, or even displacement. This will have knock-on effects on people's well-being, SDG 3, wealth inequality, SDG 10, and gender equality, SDG 5. Therefore, climate ambition is an overall imperative to ensure the respect for human rights. We must do our utmost to limit climate change to well below 2 degrees Celsius and spare no effort to limit it to 1.5. Just like for sustainable development, the concept of intergenerational justice stands front and center when it comes to climate change. The sobering truth is that currently we are not doing enough to fight the climate crisis. We must step up our actions to ensure intergenerational justice, both to achieve the SDG through the decade of action, as well as to achieve our climate goals. Once again, I would like to thank you for organizing this session and giving me the honor to open it. I wish you all a successful event, and I look very much forward to listen to the discussions and hearing the conclusions.
Thank you, Minister Khatabbi, for your fine words and for stressing the importance of meaningful youth participation in the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. We definitely agree. And I know I speak for all of us here when I say that we really appreciate your support and would love for your government to work closely with us on this initiative going forward. As you said, it's clear we're not on track to meet our SDG targets, so we echo your call for more decisive action both domestically and internationally, and your call for way more ambitious climate targets. It's clear we have to do more as a global community. We're going to move into the next part of the show now, so it's such an honour for me as an Irish young person to introduce our next speaker, Mary Robinson. Mary Robinson was Ireland's first female president, serving a 7-year term. Before being appointed as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, she served 2 terms as UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate Change, bringing the world's attention to challenges faced by vulnerable communities as a result of extreme weather events. Mary has always been ahead of her time and at the forefront of human rights campaigns. She's been a lifelong and passionate advocate for gender equality, human dignity, and women's participation in peace building. We are truly honoured to have her here today. So Mary, thanks so much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mary Robinson.
Many thanks, Conn, for that warm introduction. And I'm delighted to accept the invitation of UN Youth Delegates to participate in this side event of this year's high-level political forum on the theme of climate justice. This is the kind of intergenerational dialogue that is dear to my heart. And as you know, I am passionate about climate justice. It's very interesting that students from the Pacific have initiated a request for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate justice, and that this has become a global movement united under World's Youth for Climate Justice. I wasn't aware of this initiative. I absolutely support it. And I congratulate the countries, including Belgium and my own country, Ireland, and the youth organizations, etc., who've come together for this side event. And I hope it will raise consciousness about climate justice at the high-level political forum. I must say, I have appreciated the role of litigation in helping to create a sense of real urgency in tackling the climate crisis, because it undermines all human rights, as the Human Rights Council has told us over and over in regulations and also the reports of the independent experts. Litigation was the first subject that we tackled in the podcast that I'm involved in called Mothers of Invention, where we use humor to address climate change, but we're very serious as well. And our first guest was Tessa Shaw, because she had taken part in the litigation, the Urgenda Dutch case, which was really the only breakthrough successful case on climate justice at that time. And we wanted to highlight that this is one way of creating the urgency. But now we've had significant national cases in Germany, in France, in Ireland, in Belgium, and probably in a number of other cases that I'm not even aware of. And I know of other initiatives around the world as well. So what are the issues of what I would call climate injustice that could be highlighted in the case looking for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice? I think it's really interesting to look at the prospect of a broad advisory opinion. Unlike a case before a national court, it need not be based narrowly on evidence. One of the problems has been the proof of the causality of what has happened, how to attribute it, etc. I don't think these are the kind of issues that are necessarily relevant to a case, an advisory opinion before the International Court of Justice. I think it's more a case of bringing out all the injustices and inequalities. And actually, these have been so magnified by COVID. It has been like a mirror, not only showing us the extent of the inequalities, but also the intersectionality between them, the intersectionality between racial injustice, gender injustice, poverty injustice, the injustice of being a person with disabilities, of being a migrant, of being of your sexual orientation. All of these have been sort of magnified and brought together by COVID. We're more conscious of them, and we're more conscious of coming out of our silos in dealing with them. And this is a good thing, because I would invite those who are involved in the advisory opinion, preparing for it, to take a very broad view of the layers of injustice that can be brought together in addressing and needing a climate justice approach. The first layer that I started with in my own work, working in African countries on economic and social justice issues, was that climate change disproportionately and much earlier hits and affects the poorest countries, the poorest communities, the small island states, and the indigenous peoples. And they are not responsible for the problem. So it's a very acute injustice, and it's also a racial injustice, because these are the Black and Brown and indigenous peoples of our world. The second injustice is the gender injustice within that. The fact that women have less rights, even land rights. They have less access to capital. They've less access to training in agriculture, for example. They've less power overall, and yet they have to make their communities resilient. They have to put food on the table. When I wrote a book about climate justice, it was a book of stories, 11 stories, and 9 of them told stories of women fighting back and fighting for the resilience of their communities. But there were also 2 good men. And the point I'm making is that the gender injustice is very stark and very striking and should be brought out in an advisory opinion. And then we come to the intergenerational injustice. And it's been so good that climate activists and children striking out of school, the Fridays for Future, have been so clear on this. I've been so proud of them, if I can put it this way, how they have said in so many different ways, don't listen to us. We're only children or young people who don't yet have a vote. Listen to the science and how direct they are and how correct they are to call us out that we have not been listening to the science and doing what we should be doing. The fourth injustice, and I think this is an injustice that you can refer to in an advisory opinion, is the injustice of the different pathways to development. Industrialized countries like Ireland, Belgium, Europe generally, the United States, etc., we built our economies on fossil fuel. Now our responsibility is to wean ourselves off, but to do it with just transition for the workers and their communities who helped us to build our economies. They mustn't be left behind. They must be part of training and reskilling and investment in those communities to make sure they're part of the green jobs. But what about developing countries? I was the special envoy of the UN Secretary General at the time, before the Paris Agreement. And I kind of was well aware of the need to understand how keen developing countries were to go as green as possible in their intended nationally determined contributions before Paris. So many of them said, yes, we want to go into clean energy, but of course we'll need the investment, we'll need the skills, we'll need the training, we'll need the intellectual property where that's relevant. And we haven't shown that solidarity. We haven't lived up to the commitments in the 2030 agenda of solidarity and leaving no one behind. So a number of developing countries are continuing to use dirty energy because they have to bring their people out of poverty. It will hit them first and foremost because that's the first injustice. But of course, it could use up the whole carbon budget. So it's very stupid of us if we don't realize that we have to show that solidarity and rapidly. The fifth injustice is the injustice to nature herself, and I would include that in an advisory opinion to the International Court of Justice, because we know from a report in May 2019 of the UN that we face the acute loss of biological diversity and the extinction of maybe as much as a billion species. So, we really have to be much more conscious of linking the nature-based solutions, linking the biological diversity issues to what we're preparing for in moving to COP26 in Glasgow in November. That's the most important COP since Paris. What made Paris a success wasn't just, though it was important, that at the time President Obama and President Xi of the United States and China said, yes, we're in favor of a climate agreement. That was important. But even more important was the voices of those most affected, the small island states, the indigenous peoples, the poorest countries, the civil society. Do you remember the mantra in the street in Paris, 1.5 to stay alive? That was so acutely important because we got 1.5 degrees into the text. The goal was to stay well below 2 degrees and work for 1.5 degrees. But because the scientists hadn't studied that, they were asked by the Paris Agreement to study what's the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. And when they did, they said, oh gosh, the whole world has to stay at or below 1.5 degrees in order to have a safe future for our children and grandchildren. And therefore, the goal now is that, and countries are using a long-term goal to be net zero emissions by 2050 or even before that now, and working backwards from 2030 for the COP 26 in Glasgow. So, the impetus of the important voices at the table, those most affected, changed the Paris Agreement for the better and taught us that the world has to stay at or below 1.5 degrees. Equally, it's those voices we must hear as we move towards COP26, those voices of climate justice, your voices, your intergenerational voices on climate justice. So it's been a privilege to help you open this discussion for the high-level political forum. Let me just end with what I think are very appropriate words of the chair of the elders just before me, but he was also my boss in the UN when I served as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I don't know how often I have heard Kofi Annan use this phrase, and it seems very appropriate. He kept saying, and I do too, you are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Robinson, for this enlightening and very rich intervention. Thank you for highlighting the connections between human rights and climate change, but so much more. Also pointing out the importance of an intersectional approach in the campaign and making connections with so many other movements for this advisory opinion. So thank you so much for that. I see that our online audience is also very engaged and are inspired by your words as well. So once again, thank you so much. There are also some questions from the public, if we may.
Yep, so we've had loads of questions coming in, and just a reminder to use the hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium if you'd want to get a chance to ask some of these speakers. So I'm going to come to you now, Mary Robinson, with two questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
So the first question is from Ifka from the Netherlands, who wants to ask, how can we ensure that marginalized voices are heard in combating the climate crisis? So that's the first question. And then the second question is from Hajar, a former UN Youth Delegate as well. So hi Hajar in the Netherlands. What do you think is necessary to increase political will for countries to support this advisory opinion and in return for them to abide by it? So two tough enough questions there. So
Yeah.
over to
Thank
you.
you very much, Con. And they're really very good questions. The first question I'm very glad has been asked. I touched on it a little bit in showing before Paris how important what we might call marginalized voices were. They're the experts. Don't make no mistake about it. I saw that in my work for my Climate Justice Foundation, which wound up because we had achieved our objectives in 2019. But we used to bring marginalized voices, if we can call them that, to COPs. And they made such an impact, especially if they could be delegates. And we encouraged the women leaders, the network of women leaders on climate, to include grassroots women, young women, indigenous women in their delegations so that those voices would be heard. And they made a huge impact because you see, the delegates are technicians from cities. You know, they have their mandate from their government of what they can agree to or not. And that's what they focus on. And when they hear the genuine voice of the existential threat that people are living on a small island state, in an indigenous community, in the poorest part of a country, even rich countries, you know, how bad it is, that really creates urgency. And that's what we saw in Paris. Now we have a problem about seeing that in Glasgow because we haven't got equitable access to vaccines. You know, there is a connection between whether we're going to have the commitment of G20, that's where it's going to be in July, you know, the need for a real commitment to equitable access, the importance of ensuring that not only delegates, but also a much wider civil society of marginalized voices will be able to come to Glasgow, able to have the voices heard. So I urge the countries involved in this high-level political forum to do their utmost to make sure that those marginalized voices will be at the table. As far as the advisory opinion is concerned, I'm really very excited about this, as I said, and I think it should be done in a broad way. And I hope I'm sure there are very good lawyers involved because it's a way of addressing in legal terms the injustices. I speak about them as an advocate, and I speak about them in a kind of generalized way, but they are actually real injustices, and they can be captured in an advisory opinion. And I'm really excited about what young people, especially students from around the world, have thought about, and this initiative that you're having. And I hope that many countries will support this initiative, and that this high-level panel side event will, keep its focus on climate justice and keep pressing for the advisory opinion to be sent to the International Court of Justice and hopefully advance the urgency of the climate crisis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mary, for your comments. We could honestly talk to you for hours. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. But as a final word, I suppose just thank you so much. And we'd encourage everyone to check out your podcast, Mothers of Invention, to check out your speeches. And thank you so much again for coming to us. And we have a copy of your book, Climate Justice, on our table here. So we're big fans.
Great. Thank you very much, Con, and all the best with this really good side event.
Thank you.
No problem. So a lot of those contributions there touched on the links between climate and human rights. And speaking of which, we're now thrilled to introduce to you the World's Youth for Climate Justice campaign.
Yes, indeed, Con. The World's Youth for Climate Justice is a global campaign to take climate change and human rights to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, to seek an advisory opinion. It seeks to clarify the obligations of states to protect the rights of current and future generations from the adverse effects of climate change. Young people coming from numerous universities have collaborated on a report presenting the legal aspects of such an undertaking. We have the pleasure to welcome Liane Baers and Aditi Shetye, who will present some outcomes of this global research project. Liane Baers is a law student at Leiden University. She is supporting World's Youth for Climate Justice so the World's Youth for Climate Justice initiative academically, just like Aditi Shetye, who is a law student at Strathclyde University. They have both been involved in the writing of the WYCJ legal report that they will present here today for the first time, actually. So don't forget to use our hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium on Twitter to ask questions or the chat box. We will now start by showing you a short introduction video of the WYCJ campaign and then give the floor to Liane and Aditi.
In every year of the last decade, our world has seen greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and shatter records. But those responsible for burning the most fossil fuels have not experienced the most direct consequences of climate change. It has been us. The hundreds of millions of people living on the front line of the climate crisis. If global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius in my lifetime, countries like mine will vanish beneath the waves. I will be forced to leave the land where my ancestors are buried, and to tell my children they have nowhere to call home. At Rio de Janeiro, Kyoto, and later at Paris, we were promised action. But despite ever more opportunities to address this crisis, the planet is hurtling towards climate catastrophe. Existing international agreements have not provided countries with legal clarity on their responsibilities to reduce emissions, leading to inaction. To break the impasse, the UN General Assembly must request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on Climate Change and Human Rights. All it would take is a simple majority vote from UN member states. An advisory opinion is not legally binding but carries great legal and moral authority, encouraging all nations to protect the human rights of people affected by climate change. An opinion from the highest court in the world would also help to build a critical global coalition uniting governments and international institutions, and would define exactly what existing bodies of laws nations should follow. In the past, advisory opinions have been instrumental in establishing international laws on the right to self-determination, the prevention of genocide, and nuclear disarmament. We believe it could do the same for climate change. A planet in crisis doesn't have to be our future. If there is power in the world to save humanity from environmental disaster, it is the power of the people. But time is running out, and we have to act now. Please visit our website to join us.
Liane and Aditi, over to you now.
Thank you, Anna. We are Aditi from India and Liane from the Netherlands, and we are part of World's Youth for Climate Justice. As we've just seen in the video, we are pursuing an advisory opinion on climate justice by the Court of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. As we've heard from the previous speaker, it cannot be denied that the climate crisis is a threat to humanity. The significant impact climate change has on small island states and marginalized groups in particular merits more attention. We are young people from all parts of the world, standing up for more climate ambition and more climate equity for youth, indigenous communities, women, and future generations. Over the past months, we have collectively put our academic minds to work, together with students from 9 universities from all around the world and 1 institution. We have analyzed the legal aspects of requesting an advisory opinion, resulting in a legal report that we will present to you today. This report can be accessed at our website, wy4cj.org. Our objective with this report is to make a contribution to the discussion about how the advisory opinion could strengthen the global response to the climate crisis. Moreover, we aim to examine the extent to which the advisory opinion can contribute to the progressive development of climate justice and intergenerational equity. We hope this report will provide a basis for further deliberation on an advisory opinion on climate justice, both within UN fora and at the national level. We are proud to present our findings to you today. We will speak specifically about first what an advisory opinion is, and second, why the court is well placed to give guidance to regional and domestic courts. First of all, what is an advisory opinion in a nutshell? Each UN organ and agency can request an advisory opinion within the scope of their mandate and ask the court for clarification on a legal question. Advisory opinions are not binding under law. Nonetheless, due to the status of the court as the highest court in the world, these advisory opinions carry great legal weight and moral authority. They are often an instrument of preventive diplomacy and help to keep the peace. In their own way, advisory opinions thus also contribute to the clarification and development of international law, and thereby to the strengthening of peaceful relations between states. We are looking to the General Assembly, one of the UN's main bodies, to adopt a resolution containing a legal question about the clarification of states' human rights obligations arising from the threat of climate change, and for clarification on the principle of intergenerational equity. Simple majority support of UN member states is needed for the resolution to pass, and subsequently request an advisory opinion. My colleague will now elaborate on the potential role of the court within the realm of climate justice.
Thank you, Leanne. Now that we know what the initiative is about, I will elaborate on the benefits of the advisory opinion. Several regional courts, such as the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, have already dealt with climate-related cases on numerous occasions. Jurisprudence coming out of these courts underlines climate change as a growing concern. These courts have ruled in favor of citizens and that have demanded more ambition for climate action. In delivering an advisory opinion, the judges presiding at the ICJ can take these cases into account, thus provide authoritative guidance to regional and domestic courts on the matters relating to human rights and climate change law. So far, the ICJ has played an important role in articulating and solidifying international environmental law. It has considered cases pertaining to transboundary environmental harm, as well as regarding shared freshwater and marine resources. But a climate case has not come before the court yet. It has contributed significantly to the development of international human rights, and in the context of international environmental law, other tribunals have looked favorably on the court's articulation on international human rights principles while integrating them with principles of environmental law. The ICJ's jurisprudence on human rights has evolved considerably. Over the years, the court has weighed in on a range of topics, including interpreting the breadth of reservation to treaties on human rights, considering self-determination in the decolonization context, and prosecution and extradition of individuals accused of human rights violations. The court's role in human rights law, especially as it relates to other bodies of international law, is unique and crucial. We believe the court is well situated to deliver an advisory opinion at the intersection of human rights as well as environmental law. In conclusion, this report has aimed to demonstrate that there are sufficient sources of law to warrant and the request of an advisory opinion on climate change and human rights. In particular, an advisory opinion can contribute to the progressive development of international environmental law in two specific areas. Firstly, by spurring climate action, and secondly, by producing guidance to domestic and regional courts. At WICJ, we truly believe that this advisory opinion is a global means to raise ambition and to pursue the much needed and overdue equity for marginalized groups all over the world. Many indigenous leaders and courageous youth have put climate crisis on the global political agenda, but the world is still learning how to put human rights at the heart of this conversation. Needless to mention, the climate crisis poses an immediate and non-discriminating threat to peace, security, and stability everywhere. WICJ, being a worldwide youth-led initiative, advocate this resolution. We therefore call on any delegates attending this event to contact young people writing, deliberating, and campaigning on climate justice advisory opinion in your country. The moment to support youth leadership on climate justice is now. and we sincerely look forward to it. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Liana and Connor.
Thank you so much, Leanne and Aditi, for that really interesting summary. I know I speak for all of us here when I say that we're really inspired by the work you're doing, and it's really, really encouraging to see you fighting for a more just, equal, and sustainable world. So we're very happy to help you guys out in that campaign. So we've been getting loads of questions in from the public, so I hope you guys are ready for that. But we're going to come to one quick question first, and it's from Mark from Germany. So Mark was wondering how the advisory opinion can influence the Paris Agreement. So if you guys have any thoughts on that.
So the Paris Agreement is the first globally accepted agreement for climate change and also integrates human rights. So what we seek from this advisory opinion is exactly in consonance with the Paris Agreement. So we seek the integration and the interpretation of the International Court of Justice in consonance with human rights law and climate law and how it's related and how it could be a solution. That's all.
Great stuff, yeah. And we just have one more question. We've probably only time for one more. It's from Viral from Belgium. So I know you've obviously touched on it, but is there anything you guys want to mention and how young people can support this campaign for an ICJ advisory opinion better? Any kind of last messages you guys want to leave us?
Yes, of course. We are very glad that there are people out there who still want to support this campaign and who want to join us. So if you're a young person or a student, you could definitely join a WYCJ team or start a team if there's not one near you yet. And thereby you can build a civil society coalition of support. If you're a delegate, you could contact your youth delegates who will know more about this. And if you're, for example, a lawyer, you could legally support the WYCJ teams. But regardless of your capacity, we think it's most important that you spark a conversation with anyone near you about climate change, about justice, about intergenerational equity, and about the communities that are so severely harmed by climate change. Thereby, you can create awareness of this problem, and that is the only way we can go forward. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we definitely agree with you here. So we're really excited to see where you guys end up and to see where this work will lead you. So from us both here, we really want to wish you the very best of luck with your campaign. After all those contributions now from Minister Khatabbi, Ms. Mary Robinson, Leanne and Aditi, we're now going to move into a really exciting panel discussion. It's been great to see so many of you online talking to us, and we really appreciate all those comments. So feel free to put them in the chat box, ask questions on Twitter using the hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium, and we'll try to incorporate them into our panel discussion going forward.
So I'll start by introducing the speakers for our amazing panel right now. We have first the honor to welcome Solomon Yeo as our first panelist today. Mr. Yeo is one of the founders of the campaign and the campaign director of World's Youth for Climate Justice, so the campaign of which we saw an explanatory video earlier. Solomon, thank you so much for being here with us. It is such an honor to welcome you, welcome one of the founders of this campaign here with us today. Thank you.
Next up, we're really happy to introduce our second panelist, Professor Hajar Guldich. Hajar is the General Rapporteur for the African Union Commission on International Law. She is also full Professor of Public Law at the University of Carthage, Tunisia, and has written extensively on human rights. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Professor.
Our third panelist today is Sahar Rashid Baig. Mrs. Baig is the Global Youth Advocate for Climate, Ocean, Gender and Human Rights, and Global SDG Facilitator. She's also the contact point for YOUNGO, so the Children and Youth Constituency to the UNFCCC, the UN entity supporting the global response to the threat of climate change. Ms. Baig, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your thoughts on climate justice from a youth perspective on this initiative with us.
Then last but by no means least, our panelist for today is Gautam Narasimhan. Mr. Narasimhan is a senior advisor on climate, energy and the environment at UNICEF since 2018. Before taking up this post, he completed a wide range of work experiences, working as an environmental engineer in the United States and India, supporting the government in Afghanistan in developing energy policies and implementing a coordination platform for energy sector investments. So as you can see, our panel have a huge wealth of experience. We're really looking forward to talking to them, so I'm going to hand you over to them now.
Yeah, we would already like to thank you for bringing your views forward. It is a pleasure to have such a diverse panel. So now it's time to hear from our amazing panelists. Maybe we can start with Solomon. Solomon, looking at the World's Youth for Climate Justice campaign, I'm wondering, what do you think it means that it is gaining this attention? Is it what you expected or hoped for? And perhaps more important still, like was already mentioned before, how can people who are watching this also contribute to the campaign? Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. I think your question could be divided into two parts here. And I think to answer the first part of the question, I would just like to reflect back to when we started the Pacific Youth Campaign in 2019 at our local university. We never thought it would reach the level it is at now. And from the classrooms of our university to straight into a deep dive into advocacy at national, regional, and international platforms like the one we're having at hand. But it also proves to mind that the many success stories about the length and capabilities of what young people can really achieve if given the little support and opportunity. I believe, as I would say, this would need to happen really more. However, the reality of the campaign is that for it to be really successful, as highlighted by my colleagues from the YCJ, it requires a great level of multilateralism between states and non-state actors. And this realization is the fact that it's one of the key founding blocks of the World Youth for Climate Justice. The YCJ embodies this aspiration and translates it into action through the International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion campaign. And seeing like-minded youth from the Global South and Global North rallying under the banner of concrete climate action, it reinforces the fact that achieving climate justice would really require a worldwide understanding on the unfair inequities and particularly cooperation, especially towards practical climate solutions. I think that could be the reason as to why the campaign is gaining attention as well. Coming to the second part of your question is that is this what you would expect or hope for? Perhaps we might not expect it back then, but for certainly it is what we're hoping to see the youth to see that youth from different backgrounds all over the world campaigning for a common solution in solidarity that goes beyond the slogan itself. For the viewers out there who might be able to support, I think first and foremost we would need to highlight the key entity that will be driving this campaign to the UNGA, which are states. When the AO is put before the UNGA, states will have the option to vote whether yes, no, or even abstain from it. The target is clearly a simple majority, and state support could come in a diplomatic collaboration towards UNGA session, where like-minded states could potentially support by ensuring the negotiation of the legal question is one that is not only inclusive, but also favorable in the interest of concerned and vulnerable people all across the world. And also states could potentially co-sponsor the draft resolution as well. Also worth mentioning is the involvement of non-state actors and individuals who can also support by becoming friends of the initiative and raising the profile of the campaign as done by the powerful climate champions in this event that presented before me. And of course, support for the youth campaign. I think particulars could be clarified to changes between the parties. And as highlighted by a colleague from YCJ,
thanks so much, Solomon.
On a youth level.
Thanks so much, Solomon. Sorry, we're going to have to leave you there, but
yep.
Thanks so much for this very thoughtful intervention and for leading all the work you do in leading this inspiring campaign. We're going to move on to Professor Guldich now. So we wanted to ask you about hearing your opinion on what possibilities international law offers for strengthening climate justice and human rights. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much for your question. And let me first congratulate the organizers of this side event. Special thanks to the World's Youth for Climate Justice towards an ICG advisory opinion. I fully support your action. Concerning the possibilities that international law offer for strengthening climate justice and human rights issues, it is known that states have an obligation to respect, to protect and to fulfill and promote all human rights for all persons without discrimination. Failure to take affirmative measures to prevent human rights harms caused by climate change breach this obligation. It is also well known that human rights are universal and are based on the inherent dignity and equal worth of all human beings. They are equal, indivisible, and interdependent. They cannot be waived or taken away. Furthermore, you know that human rights are legally protected and they impose obligations in relation to actions and omissions, particularly on states and state actors. If we can have a look on the legal framework, besides the legal instruments related to human rights in general, beginning with the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and the two international covenants on civil, political rights, and economic, social, and cultural rights, there are a lot of other worldwide conventions and declarations, both all the Rio de Janeiro Declaration, the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change of 1945, and the Paris Agreement, which is legally binding global climate change agreement adopted in December 2015. Although fragile, it forms the basis of a new international legal framework to combat global warming, but the absence of mechanism of responsibility and sanctions means that we have to move to the customary international law. And in the opening speech, I heard about the due diligence. This is a rule which is very important in customary international law. This is an obligation not to cause damage to the environment of other states or to the environment in general. As you know, air pollution, for example, does not stop at the state borders. And you remember the case of Chernobyl accident in 1986. If we can see also the jurisprudence of International Court of Justice, you remember the very well-known advisory opinion of 1996 about the legality or the threat of use of nuclear weapons, in which the court said that the existence of general obligation of states to ensure that activities within their jurisdictions and control respect the environment of other states or of areas beyond national control is now part of the corpus of international law relating to the environment. And this principle also was reaffirmed by the International Law Commission. This is exactly the idea of an erga omnes obligation of environment's protection.
I'm
And
sorry,
the case
Professor.
of... Yeah,
We're gonna get you off there, but we'll get back to you very soon. Thank you so much for this legal perspective that you offer to us. Our next panelist is Mrs. Sahar Rashid Baig. Mrs. Baig, as international cooperation belongs to your daily business, we were wondering which allies do you think we need to achieve climate justice, and who do we need to include on the way to climate justice in order to leave no one behind? Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's a great opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me to the panel as well. So maybe I would answer your question in two parts, like my fellow panelist who did that before, but maybe I would answer the last part first. How can we achieve something that we leave no one behind on our road to climate justice? And the answer is very simple. It's that in order to leave no one behind, we really need to work and we really need to hear the youth voices, which are from the communities of the vulnerable, marginalized, and indigenous people. And well, at Yango, we're doing this every day. How we build allies with not only the youth-led entities who are the Yango members, and we have 1,000+ youth entities and organizations registered at Yango as their member. And we work very closely with the UN entities and agencies, being the official Children and Youth Constituency of the UNFCCC. So we recognize that it cannot be done without building meaningful partnerships. And while we are building these meaningful partnerships, we do not oversee the transition that we are striving for every day, which is to have a transition from meaningful youth engagement to meaningful youth leadership. And this is where I also want to highlight what Ms. Robinson also put: never too young to lead. And this is what we're recognizing at Yango every day. And we're including the youth voices from the vulnerable, marginalized, and indigenous communities of young people, working very much closely together, because this is what Yango is, a network of networks. One of the greatest examples for our work can be a work on allies and work on building no one behind, leaving no one behind, can be the COP25 Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, for which fortunately UNICEF is also the co-custodian together with Yango and Children's Fundamental Rights Initiative. This is literally an example of an all-inclusive action, leaving no one behind of an action, and working together, building meaningful partnerships, because all the elements of this declarations were made after the consultations from the children and young people from the global south, global north, and from children from the indigenous communities as well. So this declaration is very crucial in our road to achieve climate justice. Why? Because one, this is inclusive. Second, it highlights the importance of every single child and young person having the right to a healthy environment. I don't know how much time I have left.
Sorry to cut you off. We don't mean to be rude at all, but we just want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak. So thank you so much for that really interesting intervention. And we're now going to move to Mr. Narasimhan from UNICEF. And we wanted to ask him what he thinks UNICEF and the opportunities they have to contribute to climate justice, and what is needed for civil society to reach the full potential of climate protection. Mr. Narasimhan, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you all very much for having UNICEF be a part of this. UNICEF's entire raison d'etre, the entire reason we exist, is founded upon the Convention of the Rights of the Child, one of the most widely ratified international treaties in existence. And our actions, where we work in over 190 countries, are all directed towards safeguarding the rights of every child. And it's becoming increasingly evident that one of the greatest threats to children's rights is that of climate change. And in terms of it's also for this reason that this entire initiative of seeking an advisory opinion is so critical and important, because it's through that opinion that legislation will be formed, which then provides organizations such as UNICEF the direction on where to clarify matters such as intergenerational equity, which is essential to the way we work. In terms of how UNICEF works, I think Mary Robinson also spoke very well about it, that it's important to recognize that we aren't, while legal generalities are critical, there are real victims, and these real victims are children. Their children are the worst impacted by climate change, and whether it comes to the immediate impacts of disasters or the longer term impacts upon their development, or in the case of the most vulnerable, their ability to give their future families opportunities for livelihood. And one of the key areas where UNICEF's works is to recognize that the impacts of climate change are occurring now, and that even with all the goodwill in the world, that given climate dynamics, the impacts are likely to worsen in the near term, and that strengthening the resilience and of the services that children depend upon most, food, nutrition, health, water, are critical to ensure that children can enjoy their rights. The second area in which we work is around advocacy based on evidence. As it was mentioned before, a lot of legislation will depend upon evidence, and the evidence of how climate change is impacting children across the world and particular effects upon their health, their education, their nutrition, their ability to seek water, we hope will be very important in terms of promoting legislation that recognizes that anchoring climate change with children's rights is unavoidable. And the third area in which we work, and probably the most important, is there's a key right of a child is a right to participation. And UNICEF, through its platforms, tries to do everything that it can to support children and young people to be climate and environmental champions, both through our education programs, through providing opportunities to participate in environmental initiatives, and very critically, also trying to provide platforms for children and young people to have a meaningful role in policy development, because they're the ones that'll be the most affected by climate policy. The previous speaker from Yango pretty much said it all when it comes to what space can be expanded. When she spoke about the Intergovernmental Declaration of Children and Youth and Climate Action, it's a long name, but why that's critical is that it asks member states to recognize the explicit link between children's rights and climate action, that you can't separate the two. The other speaker also...
Sorry, I have to cut you off there as well. We'll now move to some of the remarks from the public and some questions. So I'm going to start with this question, which is pointed at Professor Gweldish. Coming from an African and law perspective, what do you think is the biggest value of the advisory opinion for climate justice? So, Professor Gweldic, this question is for you. Thank you already.
What is the, please repeat, what is the, from the
I'll
African
repeat it.
perspective? Yeah.
So, coming from an African and law perspective, what do you think is the biggest value of the advisory opinion for climate justice? Thank you.
Yeah, it is very important to give the point of view of the South. I listened carefully to Honorable I forget her name, Margaret, I think, and she said that it is a pity that the rich countries decide for the poor countries, although they are the one who are polluting the environment. So it's very important, I think, to give this perspective of the South, the perspective of the African law, and the perspectives and the challenges of our continent. And it's important as we are dealing now, we are connected. We are doing connections so that we can push this action towards a better or a more fair decision and action. This is a point of view.
Absolutely, that's a really thoughtful contribution. We're going to come to Sahir Bai from Yungo next, and this is a question submitted from the audience. So just a reminder that you can still submit questions via Twitter, hashtag HLPF 2021 Belgium. So we look forward to reading them there. But for Sahir, as a youth advocate and Yungo contact point, what do you think is needed from young people watching today, and how can they contribute?
Well, interestingly enough, these days I'm working very extensively on the advocacy trainings. I think that one thing that was a major takeaway for me as an individual was that your advocacy journey starts from you, and yours advocacy journey starts from this very second. So no matter how big or how small you achieve, if you feel very strongly about something, you don't have to be you don't have to be a contact point of some working group at Django, really, because it just what matters is that what you're doing to solve the issue that you see in the society, that you see around you. And when everyone can become a Younger member, we are a dynamic community. So you will meet like-minded people, and who can also help you with taking more steps towards your advocacy plan, towards your advocacy journey. So I think this can be a simple answer. But yeah, join Yungo.
Thank you so much. That's really amazing. I have a question for you, Gautam Narasimham. So the question is the following. What lessons can we learn from the COVID-19 pandemic in protecting children's rights? Thank you.
And again, Mary Robinson captured it really well when she spoke about what COVID has shown really is that we are only as strong as the weakest link, and that we can't take the wrong lessons from COVID thinking that if we protect only our small community, that we will be safe, because climate change knows no boundaries, similarly as in the case of the virus. The other thing that was also pointed out is the critical nature of ensuring that the recovery from COVID is targeted towards the greatest threats that children will face, because this is money that is borrowed from future generations. And the greatest threat that they will face in future generations is that from climate change. So in a nutshell, that one, that we can't draw the wrong lessons from COVID, that we can continue in an unconnected fashion. We are all interconnected and only as strong as our weakest link. And second of all, COVID recovery must be targeted towards the greatest threats that children face, which is that of climate change.
We absolutely agree, and the impact on children and young people has been really sad to see, but we're looking forward to the future now. So I'm going to bring a close to that round, but I'm going to come to you, Solomon, for another question now. So we are wondering if you could elaborate a bit on this. In what way do you see climate change concretely depriving people of their rights, and why do you think your campaign is so important right now?
That is a very important question that really contains the traces of the fundamentals to climate justice. I think in the world today, everyone's right to some extent is undermined by climate change. Yet, as many of the colleagues have mentioned, the majority of people who are really affected are mostly people living in developing countries, already facing extreme levels of their rights being deprived, and do not, or even worse, do not have the resources or capacity as do developed countries to really strengthen their resilience. Mary Robinson highlight that 1.5 is just to stay alive. This is true for us here in the Pacific. 1.5 might secure our survival, but under no means it would allow us to thrive, according to the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees. With the climate inaction moving really at a glacial pace, and definitely we are off target, the injustice will continue to exacerbate to the point where developing countries cannot really meet their SDG goals and the Paris commitments, and even worse, meaningfully protect the rights of their citizens. I just would like to be clear here that the ICJO is not, it will not be a one that wishes away the climate catastrophe. However, it is still a powerful force that can really lead to ambitious climate action, but that an ICJ advisory opinion could also ensure the voices of the marginalized countries and people can inherently influence global affairs that has long been dominated by the same small roster of powerful states. The ICJ can, in a true spirit, leave no one behind, give a judgment that reflects to the global concern of humanity as a whole, rather than to some interest of powerful states. And most importantly, it can give guidance to state obligation to provide support for each other in their efforts to protect rights of all humankind and the future of the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solomon, for this really interesting point of view. Yeah, we totally agree, I think, as young people. Next one up is Professor Gweldic. We have a question for you. As youth representatives, we are wondering how you in your position work together with young people, and what opportunities do you see in a stronger cooperation with young people on the topics of climate change and human rights? Thank you so much. Over to you again.
Okay, thank you too. On the academic level, as I am professor of international law, I deal with such questions with young students every day. I have courses on human rights and on international disputes, and we can give inspiration to our students. We push them to choose topics on update matters which are linked to the international law environment and its new challenges for their PhD and for their master's degree dissertation. We can also cooperate together with other students from all over the world to link our students and to exchange our skills and our experiences. This is a sort of sensitization of young people on the importance of such issues dealing with the topics of climate change and human rights. I think also that in our colloquiums, webinars, training course, we have to include such topics. Also, the practice of moot courts competition on such topics will be a brilliant idea. I can also tell you that as an elected commissioner at the African Union Commission on International Law, we can propose for our forums for the next years something on the climate change linked with human rights. We have annual forums that can be good opportunity to gather young people from not only the African continent but from all over the world to discuss how we can progress and develop international law and link it to such very accurate issues. As a consequence, I think that integrating human rights in climate actions will necessitate higher levels of ambition and improve mitigation and adoption of strategies. And I think it is not only the role of states, but also civil society, NGOs, youth, and academics. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Professor. We really appreciate that legal insight and your continental perspective, and we're hoping to help you out there in any way we can. So we're going to come to Sahir with our next question. It's from my colleague Tara Grace Connolly from Ireland. Very happy to be working with her, and it's about, as the fight for climate justice is inherently intersectional, how can we ensure a strong feminist perspective on the way to climate justice, and why do you think that's important? So thank you.
Excellent question, Tara. I mean, this is something that is really close to my heart. Why are we, the true essence of us being here today is, of course, the HLPF, and HLPF happens to review the SDGs. And the SDGs, the indicators that they have, you cannot achieve them if you do not include all the genders and women in actually making, while you're actually making a progress towards achieving the SDGs. This is how I see it, because the women and gender are majorly affected and disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. And they are of course, the children and the communities of children and young people and women and gender are the most affected. And we cannot ignore the fact that if we will not include them, if we will not include their voices, when we are progressing and achieving the SDGs, we will be left behind and there will be no justice of any kind. And in order to achieve climate justice, it's important to take those voices in account, and it's important to aware them more, to take the climate literacy to those societies, because mainly in the global south, the word gender is actually categorized in the marginalized community, and for us to be heard as an all-inclusive voice, we really need to break the silo. We really need to work together, and of course, there is no success if we will not include the voices of gender and women in our fight against climate justice. This is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. We completely agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, such an important contribution there. So we're going to move to Mr. Narasimham now. And concerning your everyday work with UNICEF, we were wondering about like climate justice and, you know, the links between climate change and human rights. Is that like more and more prevalent in your work now, or has it always been a priority for UNICEF?
Well, it's because it's starting to become a top priority, because I like the way that you frame that thread, because between climate change, climate justice, and the work of UNICEF, the work of UNICEF is centered around safeguarding child rights. And it is now becoming impossible to safeguard child rights and secure any of the development gains that we've seen for children over the last decades without dealing with climate change. And it used to be the case that we could kind of pretend that it was business as usual. But now the evidence that we see, not just in papers, but on the ground, whether it's in the Pacific Islands, whether it's in many developing countries, and even in industrialized countries of the US, is that this is no longer hypothetical. And therefore, this is the top priority that's becoming, both for UNICEF and other organizations, to ensure that we are securing child rights. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you so much for these insights indeed. Thank you. We're truly delighted to hear so much enthusiasm for the campaign and for the fight for climate justice from all your perspectives and all your jobs. So that's really wonderful. Thank you. And actually, so are the people in the public. So we have some questions from there, and the first one is to Solomon. So Solomon, thank you. As one of the founders, what is the biggest, or what is one of the biggest challenges you feel that the initiative is facing? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, moderator, for that question. I think the biggest challenges in facing this campaign is that it will really ultimately lies with the state through the route that we're taking through the United Nations General Assembly. This is only a state that can put before the resolution a request for an advisory opinion to the ICJ. So the challenge lies ahead in trying to secure states to support this. But that's the role of what we're doing at the moment, where youth are campaigning through the YCJ and of course in their own respective countries and regions to encourage states to see the bigger picture and to consider this campaign. So the question also goes back to the states, with to say that the youths are doing their part of the share of the bargaining, raising awareness. Will the states also be considerate and also welcome, at least hear out the initiative to call for the campaign to take climate change and human rights to the International Court of Justice?
Completely. Behind the scenes, our UN youth delegates are working like busy bees trying to get questions in from the audience. So we have one coming in for you right now. For Gautam, in what way are children more affected by climate change than, for example, adults?
Through several ways. First of all, just most obviously physically, children are more susceptible to heat. Children are more susceptible to malnutrition. Children are more susceptible to drought. Children are more susceptible to environmental pollution, such as air pollution, which has lifelong effects in terms of their neurological and mental development and their respiratory development. So that's on the physical level. And then the second is when it comes to the longer term effects. Children, for example, when through the course of natural disasters, if a child's education is disrupted more than once or twice, the chances of that child returning to school become far reduced. And then there are opportunities for being able to secure livelihoods and learn the skills that they need to escape the very sorts of agricultural and land-based livelihoods which are being most affected by climate change decrease further still. And finally, this perpetuates cycles of inequality and poverty. It is the poorest children who are affected, and as a result of climate change, their children that are more likely to become poorer still. So yeah, I hope that answers a little of that question in terms of the impacts of why the impacts are more predominant for children than for adults.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that. I have one question still for Sahar. So the question is the following: how can young people be active agents of change within climate fora? So I think you already touched upon that with explaining the work of Jungo, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, that would be super great. Thank you.
Thanks. So, of course, the first thing that for most of us, when we talk that are not in the policy space, that comes to mind when we talk about, tackling climate crisis, making them easy for everyone, is plant more trees and do small, having a more sustainable lifestyle, for example, using no plastic. As much as these things are important, I believe that youth voices in the negotiation processes and youth voices in the policy processes are 100 times more important, because how many of you actually know that there are only 42% of NDC's national determined contributions that talk anything about children and young people, and the portion for children is only 20%, and of course that is wrong, but this cannot increase if children and if the young people will not come forward, aware themselves more on these negotiations, aware themselves more, and want to contribute more in the climate and environmental policies. Then well, basically to be all inclusive, that the fight that we are having right now at Chingo, to make the negotiations, climate policies and environmental policies more inclusive of the young people will never be complete without your voices, without your contributions. So this is what I can say: plant trees, have a sustainable lifestyle, but please focus on the policies as well and aware yourself more. Join the journey. It's never too late and it's never too hard. Just join the journey. Thanks.
Absolutely. Would any of our other panelists like to come in on that question about how to be an active agent of change in terms of climate action? And we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I have another question. So for Professor Hajar, got a question coming from you from a legal point of view. So how do you see the human rights framework enforcing the UN FCC commitments?
I have problems of sound. Please repeat the question.
No problem. We were wondering, how do you see human rights enforcing the UN FCCC commitments?
Can it be an evidence?
How do you see human rights in terms of that UN FCC framework in terms of commitments?
Really, I'm sorry, I have a problem with the sound. It is not clear at all. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. We'll come back to you in a minute. Don't worry about that at all. I just want to say I was really struck by the speaker from UNICEF's comments about children and young people. Like, I know as UN Youth Delegates, we do an awful lot of work with young people, and I've done charity work and stuff in Africa, and it's just like so devastating to see the impact of that on young people. So we're hoping as Youth Delegates we can play our part, and that everyone as global citizens can do a bit to make the world a bit more of a sustainable place. So yeah.
Definitely, I absolutely agree. I suggest that we try once more the question. So, Professor Gweldic, can you hear us now?
I have problem with the sound. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries then. Then we'll go over to our closing remarks, actually.
Yeah.
Already?
No problem. We'll share your contact information with people at the end. They can definitely follow up. I know you have done so much extensive legal writing and stuff in this area, so we're really, really happy to have you on the panel. Sorry about the audio confusion there. In terms of wrapping up, we're going to do some concluding remarks from ourselves, but yeah, so if you want to take them away there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers for sharing these interesting insights, like truly, on how the climate crisis affects human rights around the globe and how we need solidarity to address the inequity arising from the climate crisis. So I suggest that we take 3 highlights from the session. So we've had our Belgian Minister Zakia Khatabbi talking about how climate ambitions must include human rights. And we've also had Mary Robinson as a guest, fully supporting the initiative and encouraging other countries worldwide to support it too, which is so great. While also highlighting 5 injustices, so racial, gender, intergenerational, pathways to development, and the injustice to nature that can be included in the advisory opinion.
Yep, so that's our first insight. In terms of number 2, we also had youth activists from the world's Youth for Climate Justice stating how an advisory opinion would be a way of addressing the injustices linked to climate change in legal terms, as well as how we support the initiative. And we're really grateful to have them involved in today's event.
Definitely. So Professor Gweldic talked about the legal aspects on the initiative, and Saher from Jungo was recognizing that the just climate transition cannot be made without a meaningful partnerships, especially from young people from marginalized communities, which is super, super important indeed. Highlighting that you are never too young to lead, and Gautam from UNICEF talked about how all UNICEF's actions are directed to safeguard children's lives, and how it is becoming more and more clear that climate is an increasing threat to children's lives. So, we hope that this side event has underlined the need to work urgently towards climate equity. We trust that this event is certainly not the end of the discussion, but rather the inspiration from which concrete action will flow, including perhaps a youth-led effort to bring climate change and human rights to the International Court of Justice.
And on behalf of myself and Anna, we want to really thank everyone for listening. Thanks again to our partners, the Belgian Foreign Ministry and the 2 Belgian Youth Councils, for hosting this side event as part of the HLPF forum.
Yes, definitely. And from my end, it has been such a pleasure to work with the UN Youth Delegates from Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, and last but not least, Ireland. Thank you also to Jungo, the major group on children and youth, and the World's Youth for Climate Justice. And also, of course, the technical team and our team around us that supported us so well during the event.
Absolutely. Let's remember what we've learned here today and keep pushing for a more just and sustainable world. Let's not forget that young people are the future. Together we can help create and shape a better world. Let us work together on this, the Decade of Action, and on the Sustainable Development Goals. And as we say in Ireland, a scór acéile a bhfaireann na daoine. Only together can we rely on each other to help create a better world. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks now.
So it's okay if we leave the call now, right?